Dedicated to the survival of American democracy in an increasingly dangerous world, this is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, acted as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy under President Ronald Reagan, founder of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., the go-to man for defense and foreign policy issues, joined by the greatest minds in the security policy business, the special forces in the war of ideas at Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. A man who has been a comrade in arms in that war for a long time is a valued friend as well as a terrific guest. His name is Robert Knight. He contributes mightily to the public policy debate of our times with essays in columns in the Washington Times, the Daily Caller, American Thinker, One News Now. He's a former news editor at the LA Times and, a pillar of the conservative movement, I think it's fair to say as well. It's great to have him with us. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Frank, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate what you're doing to educate Americans as to all these security threats we're facing.
Thank you. Well, back at you. We're going to talk about some of them right now. Let me ask you first and foremost, Bob, as a guy who seriously thinks about, writes about, studies, and articulates the cause of freedom in our country and elsewhere around the world. Tyranny seems to be on the march at the moment. I'm thinking, of course, most immediately of Ukraine and what Vladimir Putin seems to have in mind for its people. But the Chinese are in hot pursuit over Taiwan, perhaps India as well. The Iranians are spoiling for a fight with Israel and perhaps others in the Gulf. They may just get it. We're, of course, seeing tyranny across our northern border in Canada and not a little here. Maybe we could talk about each of those in turn, but what's your thought about the general observation that enemies of freedom seem to be emboldened and acting ever more aggressively?
Well, I think two things are going on, Frank. First, there are the multiple examples of tyranny growing that you've just cited. And then to them, we can add the COVID lockdowns in America and the censorious press we have that is crushing freedom with cancel culture. And we could do any number of examples. I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with them. Joe Rogan, trying to get him off Spotify, with Neil Young threatening to withhold his music if Joe wasn't thrown off. And I mean, they reach out and try to crush all the time. And so here's the other thing going on. People are waking up. They're revolting. I think the Canadian truckers convoy is giving everyone the courage to speak out. Plus, parents are now fighting school boards. They're retaking schools. Loudoun County, Virginia is the epicenter of this, where 6 school board members are being recalled. Elections are coming up. I happen to think they're going to replace most of the school board members. And they're being told that somehow they're domestic terrorists. At least that's what the term that the Attorney General of the United States and his staff applied to parents who were fighting back against the tyranny and the weird education that they were giving kids. But I'm seeing this all over the place. I'm kind of helping out with a new production called Whose Children Are They? And that's a movie that's going to come out in March. And it's all these parents, teachers, students talking about the communist-style indoctrination in schools all over America and how parents are fighting back, how teachers are fighting back, how students themselves are fighting back. They're mad. They're very upset. And I think the Democrats in particular who are orchestrating all this, when I say all this, I mean the growing tyranny in America, have been found out. They've been exposed. They know they're going to take a licking in November. And I think they're getting more dangerous right now because they know they have a very short time. If you read the Bible, Satan himself knows he has a small window left to corrupt everybody before he goes to the lake of fire. That's how I see the Democrats, that they say, the jig is up. They're on to us. what can we do to attack people, smear them, try to rig elections, whatever we can do to maintain power as best we can. And I think the way the people are being treated who were at the January 6th rally is emblematic of that. And this is why I wrote the column this week about how the Democrats are throwing around the term legitimate political discourse as a way to smear Republicans. This was a phrase that came from the Republican National Committee's resolution censuring Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for participating in the kangaroo court known as the Committee to Investigate the January 6th attack in the U.S. Capitol. What they were talking about was how the investigators there are not only going after people who committed violence at the Capitol, but anybody who was at the rally, anybody who spoke at the rally. I mean, they're extending such a wide net. They're trying to crush any opposition. Exhibit A is Representative Madison Cawthorn, Republican of North Carolina. The North Carolina Election Board, dominated by Democrats, says it has the power to disqualify him for participating in the insurrection. And they cite a law that was passed in the wake of the Civil War that was aimed at Confederates holding office. I mean, this kind of stuff isn't sitting well with the American people. And that's why I am more optimistic than I've been in some time, Frank, that the jig is up, we're onto them, and people who are ordinarily not politically inclined are onto them too.
You've laid a very rich table there, Robert Knight. Let me unpack some of the pieces of this that I think bear a deeper dive. Let's start overseas before we come to the United States. Tyranny on the march looks a lot like the potential, at least, for a global conflict. And whether Putin decides to go into Ukraine or not, he didn't happily yesterday, but he remains capable of doing it at will. And maybe simply waiting until the genocide games of his friend Xi Jinping are over next week to do just that. Alternatively, the Chinese, as I say, have made no secret of their desire to crush freedom in Taiwan as they have in Hong Kong. They also have been, it seems, putting the Indians on notice that they may take some chunks of territory from India if they can, and on and on. And I just wonder, I guess this is kind of a bridge between the foreign and the domestic, but to what extent, Bob, going back to, the time of our friend and I think common employer, Ronald Reagan, we had a peace through strength philosophy applied. It's been a bit hit or miss in the intervening period, of course, but we seem to have substantially abandoned it under Joe Biden. And I wonder whether that, in your estimation, is contributing to the sense on the part of these various tyrants around the world that they can, get away with murder.
Well, I think it began under Barack Obama. He exhibited a weakness that the thugs of the world quickly discerned, and they began moving. Now they've got Joe Biden, who is doing more of the same, projecting weakness, and they're thinking this is their time to do something. And if we do respond, it'll be badly, because the Democrats historically have been pretty bad at dealing with aggressors. And they, Joe Biden's comment about, if Putin makes a minor incursion into the Ukraine, maybe we won't react so strongly. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, except for the phrase minor incursion. He actually said that, in practically inviting them in. That put NATO in an uproar, as well it should have. And he's been rattling the sword ever since to try to make up for it. There are reports this morning that Putin is insisting that some troops have been backing away from Ukraine, but that U.S. intelligence hasn't confirmed that. He could just be messing with us, just waiting until, as you say, Frank, the Olympics are over, genocide Olympics. It's all about strength. They didn't mess with Reagan for good reason, and even with Trump, they saw strength. And the bad guys of the world retreated. I mean, he took out ISIS. The Democrats talked about it. He did it. and that's what we lack now. And they also don't see a deep bench here. I mean, what if Biden leaves? We got Kamala Harris, who's not exactly respected in the world or in the United States. A lot of Americans are sitting back saying, how long can we have such weak leadership and maintain our position in the world? It's a dangerous situation.
It is indeed. And it is, of course, as you say, Bob, exacerbated by the domestic situation. Let's talk a little bit about the vaccines and the response to, I call it the Chinese Communist Party virus.
So do I.
And what that has betokened in terms of the march of tyranny, for want of a better expression, in our own country.
Well, one thing it's done is reduced Americans' faith in their own government, because we've been lied to so many times by Dr. Fauci and the CDC. They keep changing the story. Nobody knows exactly what the truth is. They've suppressed what, by many sources, are reliable, cheap, effective treatments for COVID, especially in the early stages. They suppress that. I don't think it's too much to conclude that they cost hundreds of thousands of lives because they stuck to the vaccine-only mantra and suppressed good treatments that could have saved lives. I mean, and they did it, and they're still following that playbook that it's vaccine or nothing, and which is absurd. They're prepping little kids to be vaccinated, and they have no idea what the long-term consequences are. As a journalist or former journalist, I think it's a lifelong affliction, actually. I try to get every piece of information I can. I go to alternative media. I listen to doctors like Dr. Malone, who has pieced together a different narrative. And I read all the mainstream press and try to put it all together. And what I see is a massive power grab by the ruling elites using COVID as the excuse. And I think that Americans are fed up with it. They've had it. Democrats are starting to panic. They're quickly getting rid of the lockdowns and the face mask dictates. In D.C., the mayor has said that at the end of the month, you won't have to show a COVID passport to go into a restaurant in D.C., which should be a relief to all those businesses in D.C. that have lost a fortune by people saying, bag this, I'll just eat in Virginia. Why would I go into D.C. if I have to show my papers, like in Berlin, 1938? As I said, I want to return to that theme, Frank, that although it's a dangerous time, it's kind of an invigorating time, that so many people are starting to fight back, see who the bad guys are, and I think work to throw them out. One thing I'd like to see happen is that more, and I know you discussed this perhaps on yesterday's program, was all the stuff coming out of the Durham investigation, where that's going to go. The media have ignored it almost totally. I don't think they can do that forever. It's too damning. People like John Brennan, Jim Clapper, Jim Comey have to be held to account. And I think they know that if the Republicans take the House, which is likely in November, they're going to face investigations that will uncover things that we thought wouldn't be possible in the United States, which is actual treason at the highest levels.
Right. Well, from your lips to God's ears on the investigations, let's spend some time talking about the Durham business, because we haven't really done so much here. I'm of the view, Bob, and I just want to run this by you, that what certainly seems to be, based on John Durham's findings, the special prosecutor up in Connecticut on Friday, is evidence of, well, I call it a Clinton coup, both against the rival presidential candidate in the 2016 election, and then subsequent to his victory in the White House as well. And I think you're right. It sounds as though John Durham is painstakingly putting together uh, the faces of the Rubik's Cube, if you will, and that implicated in that coup will not only be the candidate herself, but some of her senior team members, quite a number of whom have gone into this administration. I'm thinking most especially of Jake Sullivan, now the national security advisor to the president, but also some of these other characters who we have evidence and hoped John Durham would be prosecuting, like Jim Comey at the FBI, like John Brennan at the CIA, like Jim Clapper, the director of national intelligence, and perhaps others inside the Obama administration as well. Do you see it going there as part of this investigation rolls out now?
Yeah, I think it has to go there because and a lot of people think it won't go there just because the implications are so staggering that they just can't let it happen. You know, that is a fear I have. That
certainly been the case so far, hasn't it?
It has been the case. And of course, the media are part and parcel of this. The New York Times won a Pulitzer for its Russian collusion coverage. Now we know the entire thing was a hoax cooked up by the Clinton people. If anybody was colluding with Russians, it was the Clintons and the DNC. It's out there, but are they really going to indict the former First Lady of the United States? I think that's the thought, that they're above justice, because it's just too disturbing for the country to have a former First Lady hauled into court.
Well, that's really what I wanted to get at with you. It seems to me what's at stake here is the rule of law. Is there, in fact, as we've been encouraged to believe there is, based on experience to date, with the Clintons and others in the Obama-Biden world, that there's a law for them, there are sets of rules for them, there are regulations that apply to them, and then there are those that apply to everybody else. And we might be punished. Military personnel might be, called up on charges, for example, for doing things that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is doing, or for that matter, the commander-in-chief is doing every day. And that really speaks to a profound threat to the republic. I think you're right about that. But is it now the case that with a dogged, tenacious prosecutor, who I have to confess I had kind of written off as not going to be up to this job, does it seem now possible, at least, that he is going to take this thing?
It looks like it, Frank. I had written him off too. I thought, how many years does it take to get to the bottom of this? When it's not,
some of it being pretty self-evident.
Yeah, it's not that complicated. They colluded with the Russians to smear Donald Trump. The media helped them do it. And there are a lot of guilty people out there still trying to cover it up. It's unraveling for them. I just wonder how long the media can cover this, or cover it up and just leave it to Fox News and Tucker Carlson and you and people in the alternative press to keep the flame going, to alert people about the threat to our republic that these people constitute.
Your Freudian slip there about the difference between covering and covering up.
Yeah, well,
is interesting. It's the difference, as Mark Twain used to say. I'm fond of repeating it. Between lightning and lightning bugs.
And a lightning bug, yeah. So
but hey, let me just, Bob, before we run out of time, I did want to ask you about this domestic terrorism business, because this does seem to be the leading edge of tyranny here in the United States, if it's not resisted. And I take heart, as you do, from both the growing appearance, at least, that the public is aroused to what's happening and not accepting it. Notably, in, as you mentioned, Loudoun County, Virginia, where the throwdown took place, memorably, about this racist indoctrination of kids, really changing the outcome of the governor's election there last November. But also more generally that Democratic politicians are, as you say, now beginning to punch out because this is clearly not going to go down well with voters come November, all other things being equal. But I did want to just ask you specifically about this issue of the administration branding people as domestic terrorists, and whether it's school board moms and dads or whether it's Constitution loving, gun-owning veterans, or for that matter, members of the military, to say nothing of people who they now say are responsible for dis, and malinformation. This was the latest out of, as you know, the Department of Homeland Security. Can this lead to anything other than, really a crisis in our country over our freedoms?
Well, yeah, I think we're in crisis, but we're also finding a way out of it because people realize they have to do it themselves. The elites are not going to help us. Parents are taking back the schools. They're getting their kids out of the schools, which I think is even a better idea if you can afford it. Homeschooling has doubled. It's now 11%. This is unheard of. What the pandemic was a silver lining to education because parents got a good look online at critical race theory and the crazy sex stuff they're teaching kids, and they said, not for my kid. And then they homeschooled and then realized they could do it. I mean, there's a huge homeschooling community now. And back to Loudoun County.
That's a real force for good, I think.
Well, yeah, and back to Loudoun County, Cornerstone Chapel, one of the largest churches in Loudoun County, just announced they're starting Cornerstone Christian School. And they're buying up an old Catholic academy in Middleburg that's huge, 90-acre campus. They see the need for an alternative culture. But here's what I've been telling people. Look, it's good for Christians and others to build the alternative culture because the current overarching culture is rotten to the core. It doesn't respect truth. It's trying to indoctrinate. You must go around it. At the same time, we have to take on that culture and reform it because a lot of people are caught up in it. And they're going to be voting and they're going to be controlling the lives of our kids and grandkids. So you got to take a two-track approach here, and I think that's what's happening. I really like what I'm seeing with the parents fighting back.
It's so heartening, and in particular, this news about the film that you're collaborating on, Whose Children Are They? Sounds like it can be a tremendous vehicle for further galvanizing the moms and dads across this country and empowering them, whether it's through homeschooling or whether it's getting engaged with school boards or otherwise, to push back on the tyranny.
Yeah, and
particularly in the educational system, as you say.
Yeah, and here's one other point is that a lot of these little battles over things like pronouns, where they're telling teachers, you got to tell this little boy he's a girl if that's what he thinks he is, and that sort of thing. These are not little side issues. When the government can force someone to lie and knowingly lie, that's government overreach that is tyrannical. Any government.
Bob, we have to finish that thought because we have to go. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Well, any government that's powerful enough to force you to lie, it has all kinds of power to make your life a living hell, and that's what we have to avoid here. We have to push back with the truth.
Amen. Well said, as always. Bob Knight, I hope that you will be back soon. This is a really bracing conversation, and I appreciate so much the optimistic note on which we're leaving things because it's needed. There are challenges for sure, but there are indeed opportunities as well. Thanks for all you do, the Washington Times and elsewhere, and I look forward to our next conversation in the near future.
I enjoyed it too, Frank. Thank you so much.
Next up, we'll speak with Kevin Freeman about, among other things, insider trading in Congress and the corrupting influence there. That and more, straight ahead.
Visit us at facebook.com/securefreedom with Frank Gaffney.
This is Frank Gaffney with the Secure Freedom Minute. The much ballyhooed Russian invasion of Ukraine hasn't happened yet, thank God. For the moment, this must be considered a stay of execution for the Ukrainians, not a commutation of sentence. But it always seemed more likely that Vladimir Putin would wait to impose his brand of totalitarianism on them until after his ally Xi Jinping finishes the genocide games next week, so hold the champagne. Meanwhile, tyranny is on the march closer to home. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has declared what amounts to martial law to crush peaceful truck-borne civil disobedience. And the Biden administration has been wielding unconstitutional emergency powers here, too, by imposing COVID-19 vaccine. Last week, its Homeland Security Department declared that those who object by writing so-called mis, dis, or malinformation will be treated as domestic terrorists. Freedom-loving peoples are under threat worldwide. We must stand together. This is Frank Gaffney. Welcome back, and a very special welcome to a man who we have had as a regular of this program, but not recently, I'm sorry to say, and I hope we'll be remedying that in the days to come. His name is Kevin Freeman. He is, by my lights, one of the smartest and certainly most effective conservative leaders in our country today. His area of specialization is economic warfare. His understanding of what enemies of this country, notably, but not exclusively, the Chinese communists have been doing to wage it against our country is, well, pretty much unparalleled. His platform for discussing these matters is absolutely superb. It is Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman. You can find it at Blaze TV and on other platforms. And he is a senior fellow of our Center for Security Policy, for which we're very grateful. The author of Game Plan and Secret Weapon, two best-selling books, and of course a blogger par excellence at globaleconomicwarfare.com. Kevin Freeman, it's good to have you back in the house. Welcome, virtually.
Thanks, Frank. It's good to be back with you.
You have a brand new edition of Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman about a huge problem in the economic warfare space, I think it's fair to say. Enemies, foreign and domestic, have been taking advantage of the willingness of members of Congress, including leaders in the Congress, shamelessly to engage in insider trading. Talk about the extent of this problem and its implications, if you would.
Yeah, any financial professional, any corporate official has a requirement that they're not allowed to trade on inside information before the public knows of it. And that's good. That protects the public from the big shots at big companies or stockbrokers or whatever, manipulating markets or taking advantage and not giving the average person a chance. Congress has been largely exempt from those rules. The Congress rule determines whether or not a company succeeds or fails. They can say whether they're going to mandate a vaccine or not. And they can buy ahead of that knowledge and they can profit from it, which makes, two things. One is it makes an unfair, unlevel playing field. But two, it makes the opportunity to corrupt the Congress enormous. If you know that they own shares in a company, or if they're owning shares in a company and then they're making decisions and rulings that favored their own company, I mean, they can easily be bribed. And sad to say, I think that's the case today.
When you say bribed, there are people who are obviously willing to do that sort of thing. And again, I think of the Chinese Communist Party as a preeminent example. Is there evidence that that has actually transpired, and with what effect on legislation or other matters of interest to these bribers?
Yeah, and there is evidence, and it's both Republicans and Democrats, where they've owned stocks or traded stocks as soon as they've gotten a briefing or as soon as they know, something that the rest of us don't know. But the more insidious thing is evidence is when you look at the people who get salaries, and their salaries, like Harry Reid, for example, his salary ranged from $70,000 to $200,000, something in that range. And yet, when he retired, he was a multi millionaire. And somebody asked him, he said, I guess I'm a very good investor, was his explanation. Then you see the Pelosi family with $120 million fortune, as some estimate. And how do they get it? They trade stocks. It is so blatant and so obvious. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots.
I understand it might be as high as $200 million in the Pelosi case, but that also that's involved just doing business with China. And whether it's insider information about deals or whether it's just lucrative contracts that have been engaged in, it is staggering how these folks have prospered from their time in office. Joe Biden is another example of it with his 7 mansions and heavens only knows the full amount of the windfall that has been generated thanks to his son Hunter and through other family members, I guess. There's very little doubt that the cumulative impact on this has been beneficial to the individual members and probably generally harmful to the public interest, Kevin. Is there any kind of accountability at this moment with regard to it?
Well, the top accountability would be the media reporting on it. And unfortunately, we know that they only report political. So the media has largely ignored Pelosi's windfalls until AOC, a strange bed. Politics makes for strange bedfellows, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has pointed out the hypocrisy here, and I agree with her. The members of Congress who are setting and determining the future of the companies that they're investing in should not be investing in companies. And conversely, as you mentioned, if you own a Chinese company and you're about to decide what's best for America in regard to China, but you realize it might impact your personal family fortune, you're going to act differently. You're going to act in your own self-interest, and the net result of it is the American people are not protected as the American people should.
Now, you mentioned AOC. There is, as I understand it, an initiative underway by her to force Congress to take up legislation. I gather it's the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act, or STOCK Act. As a result of her threat to force that to the floor, she has apparently gotten some traction, even from the Democratic leadership, which is among the principal beneficiaries, as you say, of this practice. Where do you think this stands and is likely to go from here, Kevin Freeman?
Well, here's the problem. It is so blatant and so obvious that the Congress can't hide when the spotlight's shown. So they always, and they've done this several times in the past, they pass weak legislation that they later rescind, and it goes away in the darkness of night. So I believe that the current effort now is going to be so watered down that it doesn't have any impact, doesn't protect the American people, doesn't stop the DC greed. So we started a campaign. StopDCGreed.com. You can go there, and in 60 seconds, you can send a clear message. And then we lit up a whole show on this. This is our show that comes out every week. We have a show drop at Thursday at 1 p.m. There will be a full show on this Thursday, February 17th at 1 p.m. You can watch the whole show, but you can take action now. Go to StopDCGreed.com and click there. We will ride herd on this. We will not let up. We will continue to evaluate. We will look at every piece of legislation that comes out and share with the people whether or not it's going to be effective. But what we need is the action of millions of American people saying, I'm fed up. And this is the first of multiple Stop DC Greed campaigns that we're going to do, because Washington has been taking advantage of the American people for too long. We've been sold down the river. They live under different standards than we live. They don't wear masks when they mandate that we do. They don't stay in their homes when they mandate that we do. We're fed up. Our trucker convoy at this moment can be StopDCGreed.com, and we're going to just push it until we get the righteous outcome. We're not giving up.
Well, praise God, because when you are set on something, Kevin Freeman, important things happen. I think that's a demonstrated fact. And let me just say, Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman, the new show coming out tomorrow, February 17th, is always accompanied by a battle plan, which in this case obviously will involve both an Align Act campaign to give people means of communicating with these legislators and demanding action, and also other steps that they can take. So this is a tremendous resource that you provide, Kevin, and I'm proud of you and always delighted to be able to help promote it. It brings me to another topic that you have been very helpful on, and that I think the American people are also, to coin a phrase, mad as hell about, at least when they learn of it. And that is the extent to which their money, their pension funds, funds that they put into mutual funds, index funds, exchange traded funds, 401k plans, and the like, much of it is being migrated by masters of the universe, as they've been called, on Wall Street, into Chinese Communist Party entities, companies, some of them tied directly to the People's Liberation Army, no less. Talk, if you would, Kevin, a little bit about what is going on in that regard. Who is, the driving force behind it, and what are the national security implications of this kind of, economic warfare?
Well, the problem is that the American people money through investing has been going to enemies, both foreign and domestic. The domestic enemy is you invest in an index fund and you have Larry Fink of BlackRock, or you have Vanguard or State Street, and they take and vote your shares, because when you're an owner of stock, you're an owner of a company, and you get to vote on how that company is run. And if you give your money to BlackRock, State Street, or Vanguard, they vote your shares in the index fund, if you bought index fund, and they vote those shares for the benefit of, unfortunately, woke principles. It's all sold out to ESG and all of those issues. That's
environment, social justice, and governance.
Yes,
ESG.
That's the domestic enemy, and that's bad enough. If we stop there, I would say Wall Street is selling you down the river to domestic enemies that want to push a progressivist, far left agenda. And literally, it is a form of fascism, because it's the corporation and the state joining together to push, everything, the Green New Deal and everything else, without your consent. You're supposed to get the consent of the government. They're doing it without your consent. They're taking your money and voting for that, and the companies are pushing it. That's bad. What's worse is those same people, Larry Fink being the poster child of this, and I don't say this lightly, and in fact, I say it with strong support. Even George Soros has called out Larry Fink for taking your money and investing it in communist China that is against all of the principles. It is the height of hypocrisy, because your investing dollars are not only being voted against your values here, they're being sent to China to develop weapon systems, to develop control systems for their people, the social credit scores, and the computer, the monitoring, the cameras everywhere. All of those things are being funded with American money to the tune of trillions of dollars, and none of them have the purported beneficial effects, and none of them have liberty at mind. And so what we've been doing, and this is why people should be mad as hell, is that we've been funding our own demise, both foreign and domestic, and Wall Street has sold us down the river, and that has got to stop.
Right. And you have been covering this relentlessly, I want to say, and thankful for it, at Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman as well. And economicwarroom.com, I believe, is your one-stop shop for those products. Am I right?
Absolutely. And it covers both sides, the foreign and the domestic side, because as you point out all the time, when you take the oath to the Constitution, it's against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we're seeing both of them collaborating in many cases to the detriment of American liberty.
That's the really scary piece of this. Kevin, one of the things that is heartening to me is that, as you have been doing, others are now increasingly engaging in naming names. And Larry Fink is one of those whose name keeps turning up, I think, everywhere, basically. But the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Peter Schweitzer in his new book, Red-Handed, the Coalition for Prosperous America, consumers research, and our own Committee on the Present Danger of China, of course, of which you are an important member, are all resources now, as is Economic War Room, for information about the sorts of people who are, well, as I'm fond of saying, playing for the other team. It's not just Eileen Gu, famously, in the genocide games. It is these corporate mavens on Wall Street and elsewhere. It is our academic institutions, professors on the take with the Thousand Talents program. It is Hollywood, the media more generally, and not least, as we were discussing a moment ago, Kevin, it is American politicians. Joe Biden being perhaps the most egregious example, but only one. And I had a chance to talk recently with Trevor Loudon, our duty expert on this enemy within problem. And, he is very, very concerned. I think all of us must be, that this problem now may be getting more exposure, but it persists. And it really seems to me it's treasonous at the end of the day. Your thoughts?
Well, there's no question that it is treasonous. These, and again, it goes back to the Stop DC Greed idea. You said you're heartened by people naming names. When George Soros can call out Larry Fink for his hypocrisy, it's pretty obvious and pretty simple to name the names. It's not. I guess it does take courage because they're going after people who have any form of dissent. But this is it. We're playing for the future of our children and our grandchildren. This is liberty's last call. And it's our opportunity to stand up and, like the Stop DC Greed campaign, like the trucker convoy, like the defund the vaccine mandates, and say, look, this is a nation built on liberty. We don't want this greedy, pseudo-scientific, far left progressive cabal controlling our lives. And if we don't stand up now, there will be a very bloody battle fought someday to try and recapture liberty. If we stand up now, we will put them in a box. We are the majority. We love liberty and we love the American ideal and experiment, and we should be exporting the Constitution and the liberties that it has to the rest of the world rather than importing their efforts to shut down our free speech, to make us all think alike, to make us all, take the same shots and live the way they want us to live, and so forth. This is
social
a time to stand
credit
up for
system.
individual liberty.
Yeah. To add to the list of things that can be done, we have a Mad as Hell campaign, we call it, the Committee on the Present Danger of China. It's still kind of in the formative stages, frankly, but you are doing incredibly important work in this regard. Now with Liberty University, and I'd like to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that, and also the alternative to ESG that you are promoting.
Sure. Well, first is we're in an economic war. That's the title, Economic War Room. And it's called that for a reason, because before there is the shooting war, which we hope we never get to, there's an economic war. And they're using economics to silence us, debanking, deplatforming individuals. So Mike Lindell says something and they don't like him. And so they said, well, you can no longer have a bank account. They're doing it to the trucker convoy, stealing literally the money that was sent to them. And so it's economic. It's about money. Three things you do with your money: give, spend, and invest. The investing we've talked about, how they've tried to steal that from us. The way to fight back is to get your financial advisor at the local level. And I was just interviewing Glenn Beck on this. He said the answer to the Great Reset is local. Get a local financial advisor. The problem is you say, my local advisor at Edward D. Jones or at Merrill Lynch or Independent, they don't know how to deal with any of this stuff. And that's largely true. So we began a training program from the Economic War Room. It will launch at Liberty University this spring. We're going to train 10,000 financial advisors. That will be $1 trillion of client capital. And you'll be able to say, oh, that's an advisor who's been trained and is a part of the NSIC, National Security Investment Consultant Institute. And I want that. I want somebody to not only protect my money from the economic warfare threats, but to use my money to protect and defend my values. I don't want ESG, which is environmental, which is Green New Deal, social justice, critical race theory, and gender quotas on corporate boards. I want liberty. I want security. I want values. Those are the three principles of America. to have a free people where you get to economically decide what you want to do. Security, where the government protects you from enemies, foreign and domestic, and protects your liberties and your personal right to protection, which would be Second Amendment. They're trying to debank gun companies, but security is a part of this nation, and the Second Amendment says that we have a right to protect ourselves. And values, there is a difference, a stark difference between Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, and values in the rest of the world, godless communism and so forth. We want to protect Western civilization values. People live freer and happier under Western civilization values. We need to defend that. That is the dream of America. It's time we stood up for it with our money, as well as with our voting, as well as with every other action we take.
Well said, Kevin. And I know this comes from your heart, as well as your deep knowledge of both those values, as you put it, LSV, that are at the core of this God-given country of ours, and we'll lose it if we do not protect those values. Let me ask you about, in that regard, Kevin, something you touched on a moment ago, the effort to suppress our freedom of speech, among other freedoms, often in the name of, this vaccine tyranny. The Department of Homeland Security last week declared that individuals who engage in dis, and malinformation will be considered to be domestic terrorists. What are the implications of that for freedom and for our country if it is allowed to stand?
Well, the show that drops tomorrow, we mentioned, is Stop DC Greed. The one that is currently out now is The Great Reset with Glenn Beck. The one immediately preceding that was with Ben Weingarten. It was titled The Year of the Ruling Class Weaponized Its Powers to Crush Dissenters. The implication, it's happening before our eyes. You can see it in headlines. Once you've red pilled, you see it everywhere. The cabal that wants to control our lives is now telling us what we can speak and think. And so if you say the wrong things, and when you said malinformation, that means it's true information. It's just true information that causes people to react a way that the government doesn't like. So even if you tell the truth, if it causes people to react a way the government doesn't like, you're a domestic terrorist. By contrast, Anthony Fauci gave misinformation, outright lies on masks. Early on, he said they worked and he said they didn't work. One of those is a lie. One of them is absolutely a lie, but it was to serve the state's interest, and therefore it's acceptable. It's not considered terrorism. This is the problem. Once a state has the power to crush dissent, and they can tell you that this is malinformation or misinformation, call you a terrorist and treat you as a terrorist, then you have one party rule forever and always. Because any dissent against that, you're a terrorist, you get locked up. This is how dictatorships operate. This is how we lose all our freedoms. And that's why the First Amendment guarantees free speech. This is so contrary. To treat those people that stand up patriotically to defend our rights as terrorists is so contrary to the American way. It is sad, it's pathetic, and it must be ruled down by the courts, and it needs to be shouted down by the American.
Amen. It's dangerous, I think, is the other thing it is. I'm reminded in connection with that point about Fauci and the masks, the Islamists, of course, had a formula for addressing the inconsistencies between passages that appeared earlier in the chronological Quran and passages that appeared later. It was called abrogation. And I think when Tony Fauci spoke of masks as working after he spoke of masks as not working, he was effectively abrogating his previous comments. So it's the lie that they do work that is really the one that we have to be concerned about. And as is the larger point, Kevin Freeman, which you've made very powerfully just now, which is talk about masks. This is the mask slipping on tyranny against our country, against its freedoms, against its people. And you're absolutely right that it must be hopefully struck down by the courts and denounced and opposed by the public, whether they're in trucks or otherwise. Civil disobedience maybe the order of the day. Peaceful, of course. Kevin Freeman, we have to leave it at that for the moment. Thank you for all you do, especially at Economic War Room and with our Committee on the Present Danger of China and for our Center for Security Policy as well. Godspeed, my friend, and all you do. Come back to us again very soon, if you would. I hope the rest of you will do the same again tomorrow, same time, same station. Until then, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
This is Frank Gaffney with the Secure Freedom Minute. The much ballyhooed Russian invasion of Ukraine hasn't happened yet, thank God. For the moment, this must be considered a stay of execution for the Ukrainians, not a commutation of sentence. But it always seemed more likely that Vladimir Putin would wait to impose his brand of totalitarianism on them until after his ally Xi Jinping finishes the genocide games next week, so hold the champagne. Meanwhile, tyranny is on the march closer to home. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has declared what amounts to martial law to crush peaceful truck-borne civil disobedience. And the Biden administration has been wielding unconstitutional emergency powers here, too, by imposing COVID-19 vaccine. Last week, its Homeland Security Department declared that those who object by writing so-called mis, dis, or malinformation will be treated as domestic terrorists. Freedom-loving peoples are under threat worldwide. We must stand together. This is Frank Gaffney.
I'm Robert Muse, co-founder of the American Freedom Law Center, a national public interest law firm that fights for faith and freedom in federal and state courts across the country. Make no mistake, we are living in dangerous times. Left-wing progressives in government are assaulting our Constitution like no other time in the history of our great nation. Indeed, we hear politicians at the highest levels of government and a major political party espousing what they believe to be the benefits of socialism and the unrestrained growth of the federal government. Fortunately, our Constitution was designed to prevent tyranny and to protect liberty. It enshrines fundamental freedoms in the Bill of Rights, which was designed as a brake on the power of government. In short, our Constitution was designed to protect private citizens like you and me from the tyranny of government. I can assure you that the American Freedom Law Center will do its part to hold tyrannical government officials accountable in our courts of law so that we, the people, remain a free people. You can support the important work of the American Freedom Law Center with a tax-deductible donation. Please visit our website at www.americanfreedomlawcenter.org.
History was made on today's date. Stay tuned for an American Minute with Bill Federer.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shore of Tripoli, the Marine Corps anthem recalls when North African Barbary pirates were seizing American ships and cargo and selling the crew as slaves. On February 16, 1804, in the most bold and daring act of the age, Lieutenant Stephen Decatur sailed his ship, the Intrepid, at night into the pirate harbor of Tripoli, burned a ship, and escaped unharmed amidst fierce fire. The Arabic treaty offered by Tripoli stated, "We agree that if American Christians are traveling with a nation that is at war with Tripoli, neither he nor his goods shall be taken."
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.